I once noticed something disturbing. Most people don't actually want the truth. They want participation. They want you angry when they're angry, afraid when they're afraid, offended when they're offended. They want access to your emotions. And when they lose that access, they panic. Not because you hurt them, because they can no longer control the direction of your mind. That's why your growth often sounds like silence before it looks like success. Nobody hears discipline. Nobody hears self-respect. Nobody hears healing. But everyone hears drama. Everyone hears outrage. Everyone hears a public collapse. Noise is easy to advertise. Peace is not. So while they gather crowds, you gather strength. While they collect opinions, you collect patience. While they chase attention, you build a life. And one day the distance becomes impossible to ignore. Not because you defeated them, because you outgrew the battlefield. The world has enough people trying to win arguments. Very few are trying to win themselves. Be one of those people. God notices the battles nobody applauds, the temptations nobody sees, the responses you never sent. That record matters more than any rumor ever spoken. And here's the part nobody tells you. The moment you stop reacting, some people become obsessed with you. Not interested, obsessed. They replay your silence in their minds. They search your face for anger. They wait for the message, the explanation, the emotional explosion. And when nothing comes, their imagination starts doing the work for them. Because a quiet mind cannot be manipulated the same way a wounded one can. Let people misunderstand you if they must. Let them talk. Let them guess. Let them create stories. God already knows the truth. And in the end, truth does not need volume to survive.
Do you know what happens after that?
At first, nothing. That's the part most people cannot tolerate. You expect justice immediately. You expect people to realize who was wrong. You expect the truth to walk into the room and introduce itself. But life rarely works that way. Sometimes the lie gets applause. Sometimes the actor gets sympathy. Sometimes the loudest voice sounds like the honest one. And that is where most people break. Not because they are weak, because they are impatient. They start explaining, defending, chasing people who already made up their minds. They trade their peace for a chance to be understood. What a painful bargain. You can spend years proving your character to people committed to misunderstanding it. Years, and still lose. Not because your truth was weak, because their pride was stronger than their honesty. So stop measuring your progress by who approves of you. Some people will never clap for your growth. Your growth reminds them of their excuses. Some people will never celebrate your discipline. Your discipline exposes their laziness. Some people will never respect your silence because your silence forces them to hear themselves. And many people are terrified of what they hear. Look carefully. The person constantly talking about others is usually hiding from himself. The The person obsessed with your mistakes is often running from his own. The person demanding your reaction is usually dependent on it. That is why calmness feels powerful. Not dramatic, not flashy, powerful. Because it breaks invisible chains. Suddenly they cannot predict you, cannot provoke you, cannot pull you into their storm. And for some people, that loss of control feels unbearable. There's another reason people become loud. And nobody likes talking about it. Sometimes people can feel you leaving long before you actually leave. Not physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They notice that you no longer argue the same way, no longer chase, no longer beg to be understood, and something inside them becomes uneasy. Because they were never attached to your presence. They were attached to your availability. There is a difference, a very dangerous difference. People who value you want your happiness. People who use you want your access, your time, your attention, your emotional energy, your constant reaction. The moment those things become unavailable, their behavior changes. Suddenly you're cold. Suddenly you've changed. Suddenly you're difficult. Interesting. When you were exhausted, they called it loyalty. When you finally protected yourself, they called it selfishness. That tells you everything you need to know. Some relationships survive only as long as one person keeps sacrificing himself. The day the sacrifice ends, the relationship reveals its true shape. And that truth hurts. Not because you lost someone, because you realize they were never standing where you thought they were. But don't become bitter. That's another trap. A wounded heart often wants revenge. A disappointed mind wants to prove a point. An injured ego wants witnesses. Resist that urge. Not every lesson needs a response. Not every betrayal needs an announcement. Not every disappointment deserves a stage. Some chapters end best in silence. Keep your dignity. Keep your direction. Keep your faith in God. Let people explain themselves through their actions. Let time expose what words try to hide. And while they spend months discussing you, spend those same months becoming someone they can no longer reach. Because the most painful thing for people who wanted your attention is discovering they no longer own a single second of it. And one day, you'll wake up and realize something strange. The people who once occupied your thoughts every day barely visit your mind at all. Not because you forced yourself to forget them, not because you won some imaginary battle, but because life kept moving, and so did you. That is the part nobody prepares you for. Healing is rarely dramatic. There is no music, no grand speech, no perfect ending. One morning you simply notice that the wound no longer controls the room. It still exists, but it no longer gives orders. The memories remain, the lessons remain, the scars remain, but the power they once had over you begins to fade. And that's when you understand something most people never learn. Pain is temporary. Identity is not. Never build your identity around what hurt you. Never make a home inside your suffering. Never turn your wounds into your personality. Because some people spend years introducing themselves through their disappointments. Years. years. My betrayal, my heartbreak, my failure, my loss. And without realizing it, they become prisoners of events that ended long ago. You deserve better than that. You are more than the people who left, more than the mistakes you made, more than the rumors spoken behind your back, more than the seasons that tried to break you. Life is too short to keep dragging dead chapters into new pages. Too short. There are still goals waiting, skills waiting, experiences waiting, people waiting, blessings waiting, doors you haven't even seen yet. Imagine missing all of that because you stayed emotionally attached to a moment that God already carried you through. No, keep moving. Even when nobody claps, even when nobody notices, even when progress feels invisible. A tree does not become tall in a single night. A mountain is not built in a weekend. And character, real character, takes years. Stay patient with yourself. Stay honest with yourself. Stay disciplined when nobody is watching. Because one day you'll look back at this version of yourself and realize something beautiful. The thing that almost destroyed you was actually teaching you how to survive what comes next. And perhaps the hardest lesson of all, not everyone who loses you will miss you. Some people only miss the benefits, the convenience, the attention, the comfort of knowing you would always be there. That realization can feel cold, colder than anger, colder than rejection, because it forces you to see people as they truly are, not as you hoped they were. And hope has a strange habit of decorating reality. It paints over cracks. It explains away disrespect. It turns patterns into accidents. It turns warnings into misunderstandings. Until one day reality becomes too heavy to ignore. That's why maturity is often painful, not because truth hurts, because truth removes excuses. You stop asking why certain people treated you badly. You stop asking why they lied, why they betrayed, why they disappeared, why they changed. And you start asking a different question, a better question. Why did I keep ignoring what was right in front of me? That question changes everything, because it returns power to your hands. You cannot control another person's character. You cannot control their honesty. You cannot control their intentions. But you can control what you tolerate. You can control what you allow. You can control who receives access to your life. And that is where freedom begins. Not when people change, when you do. Many people spend years waiting for apologies that never come, years waiting for closure from people who cannot even be honest with themselves, years waiting for accountability from people still busy blaming everyone else. Do not waste your life standing at that door. Some doors never open. Some answers never arrive. Some apologies never exist. And that's okay. Really, it is okay. Because closure is not always something you receive. Sometimes it is something you decide. You decide to stop carrying the weight. You decide to stop reopening the wound. You decide to stop negotiating with the past. God did not create you to spend your entire life staring backward. There are roads ahead of you, lessons ahead of you, mercy ahead of you, opportunities ahead of you. Keep keep walking toward them. Not with bitterness, not with hatred, not with revenge, but with wisdom. Because wisdom is what remains after pain has finished teaching. And some of the strongest people you'll ever meet are simply people who finally stopped looking back. There is something else that changes when you stop looking back. You stop feeling the need to prove your worth. And that is a dangerous moment. Not dangerous for you, dangerous for the people who built their importance on your insecurity. Because an insecure person is easy to control, easy to pressure, easy to manipulate, easy to sell fear to. Just make him doubt himself, that's all. Make him question his value, his future, his ability. And he'll spend years seeking permission from people who never earned the right to give it. But once a person understands his value before God, everything starts changing. The approval loses its power. The criticism loses its poison. The rejection loses its sting. Not completely. You're still human. The words still reach your ears, but they stop reaching your identity. And there is a massive difference between those two things. A lie can reach your ears. A lie should never reach your soul. Unfortunately, many people allow exactly that. One insult, one betrayal, one failure, one embarrassing moment, and suddenly they spend years carrying a label they never deserved. Weak, broken, finished, unworthy, not enough. Who told you that? Who convinced you that a bad season was your final chapter? Who decided that one mistake should become your entire story? Life does not work that way. God does not work that way. Human beings make mistakes. They fall, they fail, they get lost, they choose wrong roads. Sometimes they waste years. And yet some of the strongest people in history were once standing exactly where you thought your story ended. The difference was simple. They kept moving. Not perfectly, not confidently, not without fear. They just kept moving. That is what most people underestimate. Consistency looks ordinary while it is happening. A single day changes very little. A single workout, a single prayer, a single book, a single decision, none of them look impressive. But stack them together for months, for years, and suddenly your entire life becomes unrecognizable. That is how real transformation happens. Quietly, patiently, without announcements, without crowds, without permission. While everybody else is busy talking about what they want to become, you become it. While everybody else is explaining, you are building. While everybody else is watching, you are growing. And one day, people will call it luck, because they never saw the nights, the discipline, the restraint, the sacrifices, the prayers, the lonely decisions nobody applauded. But God saw them, every single one. And that is why you keep going, even when nobody else understands why. And if you keep going long enough, something unexpected begins to happen. The things that once felt impossible start feeling normal. The discipline that used to exhaust you becomes routine. The loneliness that used to scare you becomes familiar. The challenges that once looked enormous become part of your daily life. Not because life became easier, because you became stronger. Most people spend their lives waiting for life to become lighter. Very few focus on becoming heavier than the weight they carry. Think about that. A storm does not ask whether you are ready. A difficult year does not check your schedule. A betrayal does not arrive with a warning label. A loss does not wait for permission. Life arrives when it arrives, and when it does, the person you have become is the only thing standing between you and collapse. That is why character matters. More than talent, more than appearance, more than popularity, more than attention. Because attention can disappear overnight. Money can disappear. Opportunities can disappear. Crowds can disappear. But character follows you everywhere. In success, in failure, in private, in public, especially when nobody is watching. That's the real test. Not who you are when people applaud. Who you are when nobody knows what you're carrying. Who you are when nobody sees the temptation. Who you are when nobody would discover the shortcut. Because that version of you, that hidden version, is the one shaping your future. Many people think destiny is built through huge moments, huge decisions, huge opportunities, huge victories. Sometimes. But more often, destiny is built through ordinary choices repeated for years. Choosing patience when anger feels easier. Choosing discipline when comfort feels better. Choosing faith when doubt feels louder. Choosing action when excuses feel safer. Day after day, week after week, year after year, until one day people see the result and call it overnight success. Overnight. What a funny word. They never saw the nights that created it. The nights when nobody believed. The nights when you questioned yourself. The nights when progress was invisible. The nights when quitting looked reasonable. But you stayed. Maybe not perfectly. Maybe not confidently. Maybe not without fear. But you stayed. And staying matters more than most people realize. Because winners are not always the most talented, not always the smartest, not always the strongest. Often, they are simply the last ones who refuse to leave. So keep building quietly, keep learning quietly, keep praying quietly, keep improving quietly. Let others announce every intention. Let others chase every spotlight. You focus on becoming. Because in the end, a strong life makes more noise than a loud mouth ever could. And maybe that's why so many people are addicted to noise. Noise creates the illusion of progress. Talking feels productive. Complaining feels productive. Announcing plans feels productive. Arguing feels productive. But feeling productive and being productive are not the same thing, not even close. A person can spend 10 years discussing success without taking a single step toward it. A person can spend 10 years criticizing others without improving himself once. A person can spend 10 years explaining why life is unfair without changing anything. And the frightening part? They often don't realize it. Because words create comfort. Words create the feeling that something is happening. action is different. Action is lonely. Action is repetitive. Action is often boring. Nobody posts the 1,000 ordinary days. Nobody celebrates the endless repetition. Nobody applauds consistency while it is happening. They only notice the result. That's why so many people quit. Not because the dream was impossible, because the process was quiet, because the reward was delayed, because nobody was watching. Human beings naturally want evidence, evidence that their effort matters, evidence that they are moving forward, evidence that the sacrifice is worth it. And when that evidence doesn't appear immediately, doubt enters the room, slowly, quietly, like a thief. Maybe you've felt it before. That moment when you wonder if anything is changing, if the discipline matters, if the patience matters, if the prayers matter, if the effort matters. Listen carefully. Just because you cannot see growth does not mean growth is absent. You don't see a tree growing every day. You don't see a mountain changing every day. You don't see character developing every day. Yet all three are happening, whether you notice them or not. The problem is that modern life trains people to worship immediacy, immediate attention, immediate pleasure, immediate validation, immediate results. And when reality refuses to move that fast, people become frustrated. They abandon the path. They return to distraction. They return to noise. Not because noise works, because noise is easier to measure. A crowd reacts immediately. A social media post reacts immediately. An argument reacts immediately. A distraction reacts immediately. Growth rarely does. Growth asks for trust. Trust in the process, trust in the effort, trust in God's timing, trust that today's invisible work is building tomorrow's visible outcome. That kind of trust is rare, very rare, because it requires patience in a world addicted to speed. It requires discipline in a world addicted to comfort. It requires faith in a world obsessed with certainty. And that is exactly why so few people reach their potential. Not because they lacked ability, because they abandoned the road before the harvest arrived. Don't make that mistake. You've already survived too much to quit now. Keep going. The roots are growing even when the tree is still invisible. And remember something. Roots never ask for applause. They grow in darkness, under pressure, under silence, under dirt. And maybe that is exactly where God is building parts of you nobody can see yet. Not the public version, not the smiling version, not the version people judge from a distance. The real version. The one that keeps standing when the room is empty. The one that still prays when the heart is tired. The one that still chooses discipline when emotions start begging for escape. That version of you is not weak. That version is being forged. But forging does not feel beautiful. It feels like pressure. It feels like heat. It feels like being misunderstood while still trying to become better. And that is why you cannot let loud people decide the meaning of your quiet season. They do not know what God is correcting in you. They do not know what He is removing from you. They do not know what He is preparing you for. Some people only see your silence and call it failure. They see your distance and call it weakness. They see your patience and call it fear. Let them be wrong. Seriously, let them be completely wrong. You are not responsible for educating every blind opinion. You are not responsible for correcting every mouth that speaks without wisdom. You are not responsible for standing in court every time someone invents a case against your name. That is not peace. That is slavery with better excuses. Free people do not chase every chain thrown at their feet. They step over it, quietly. And sometimes stepping over it hurts. Because part of you wants to answer. Part of you wants to expose them. Part of you wants to say, no, you don't know what really happened. But another part of you, the stronger part, knows that not every truth belongs in public. Not every wound needs witnesses. Not every victory needs noise. Some victories are private. Some victories are simply not sending the message, not opening the door again, not becoming cruel because someone else was careless with your heart. That is strength, quiet strength, the kind that does not beg to be seen, the kind that does not perform for applause, the kind that God sees even when nobody else understands. So continue, even if your hands are tired, even if your mind is heavy, even if your progress looks small. Small progress is still rebellion against the old version of you. And every day you refuse to return to chaos, you are winning something deeper than an argument. You are winning yourself. There's a strange moment in life when you stop asking people to understand you. Not because understanding doesn't matter, it does, but because you finally realize something painful. Some people are not confused. They are committed. Committed to the version of you that makes them comfortable. Committed to the story where they are innocent. Committed to the lie that allows them to sleep at night without facing themselves. And you can bring evidence, you can bring history, you can bring your whole heart on a plate. They will still choose the version that protects their ego. So what do? Do you scream louder? Do you bleed in public? Do you keep cutting yourself open just to prove you were wounded? No. You stop auditioning for sympathy. That is where dignity begins. Not in revenge, not in proving them wrong, not in making them regret it. Dignity begins when you decide that your peace is no longer available for debate. Because every time you explain yourself to someone determined to misunderstand you, you are paying rent in a prison they built with their opinions. And some of you have been living there for years, waiting for one apology, one confession, one moment where they finally say, I see what I did. But what if that moment never comes? What if they stay blind? What if they stay loud? What if they continue laughing in rooms you are not in? Will you stop becoming? Will you pause your destiny until an unfair person becomes honest? That would be tragedy. Not because they hurt you, but because you handed them the years after the wound. Listen carefully. Pain is not always your fault, but healing becomes your responsibility. Not because they deserve freedom from accountability, but because you deserve freedom from their shadow. There are people who will never know how much restraint it took for you to stay quiet. They will never know the replies you typed and deleted. the words you swallowed, the nights you stared at the ceiling, fighting the urge to become as cruel as they were. But God knows. Every silent victory, every private tear, every time your anger begged for permission and your faith said no. That matters. That counts, even if nobody claps, especially if nobody claps. Because real strength is rarely entertaining. It is not dramatic enough for crowds. It is not loud enough for gossip. It is not colorful enough for people addicted to chaos. Real strength looks boring from the outside. A man walking away, a woman not replying, a heart choosing patience, a mind refusing to become a battlefield. But inside, that is war. A silent war against the version of you that used to react, against the version that needed approval, against the version that confused access with love. And every time you stay calm, that old version loses power. Every time you choose discipline, that old version becomes weaker. Every time you refuse to return to what broke you, you are burying a past identity. Do not underestimate that. Some people never escape themselves. They change cities, change friends, change relationships, change clothes, change voices, but keep the same chaos living inside them. And then they wonder why every road leads to the same pain. You cannot outrun what you refuse to face. You cannot heal what you keep disguising as personality. You cannot build a new life while secretly protecting the habits that destroyed the old one. That is why silence is not empty. Silence is where you meet yourself without applause, without excuses, without an audience. And for many people, that is terrifying. Because noise lets them avoid the mirror. Drama lets them avoid responsibility. Anger lets them avoid grief. Attention lets them avoid emptiness. But you are not here to avoid yourself anymore. You are here to become honest, dangerously honest, calm enough to see your wounds, strong enough to admit your mistakes, faithful enough to believe God can still build something clean from what felt ruined. So let them continue their noise. Let them speak from distance. Let them decorate your name with things they do not understand. And after all of that, you start becoming dangerous in a quiet way. Not because you want to hurt anyone, because you are no longer easy to move. A person who can be provoked is still owned by the hands that provoke him. A person who can be shamed into returning is still owned by guilt. But when you finally see these strings, something breaks, and something stronger takes its place. You stop answering every sound like it is a command. You stop treating every opinion like a verdict. You stop allowing temporary emotions to make permanent decisions. That is not coldness. That is maturity. Cold people feel nothing. Mature people feel everything, and still choose wisdom. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is you holding the door shut while the old version begs to come back. The version that reacted, the version that chased, the version that explained, until his soul became tired. You know that version. It wanted justice immediately. It wanted people to feel what they made you feel. But listen, that version was wounded, not wise. You cannot let a wound lead your life. A wound chooses revenge and calls it strength. A wound chooses bitterness and calls it truth. Pain becomes a false teacher if you sit with it too long. It tells you never to trust again, never to soften again, never to hope. But God did not bring you through pain so you could become smaller. He brought you through it so you could become deeper, cleaner, more aware, more difficult to deceive. That is the transformation, not becoming cruel, becoming clear. Clear enough to forgive without reopening the door. Clear enough to walk away without hatred. Clear enough to let people be loud without needing to defeat them. Because defeating them was never the mission. Winning yourself was. They think power is making others fear your reaction. No. Real power is when your reaction no longer controls you. Being misunderstood and not rushing into panic. Being attacked and not selling your dignity for a reply. That restraint is expensive. It costs pride. It costs ego. It costs the pleasure of the last word. But it pays you back in peace. Peace is not cheap. It is earned in moments nobody sees. So keep earning it. Quietly, patiently, with your eyes forward, with your faith alive. Let them perform. Let them build noise around your name. Noise gets tired. Truth does not. And there is one thing you must understand before you go any further. Peace will make you look guilty to people addicted to drama. Because they expect panic. They expect defense. They expect shaking hands, angry messages, nervous explanations, emotional collapse. They expect you to run behind your name like a servant chasing a crown that was never theirs to take. And when you don't, when you stand there calm, when your face does not break, when your mouth does not rush to rescue their opinion of you, they become confused, then offended, then louder. Because your silence exposes something they were trying to hide. It exposes that their power was never real. It depended on your reaction. It depended on your fear. It depended on you believing that every mouth deserved access to your peace. But not every mouth deserves an answer. Not every opinion deserves a seat in your mind. Not every accusation deserves your energy. Some people throw dirt because dirt is all they have in their hands. Do not kneel down to examine every handful. Keep walking. And understand this. Walking away is not always weakness. Sometimes walking away is the highest form of self-respect, because staying would require you to become someone God did not create you to be. Cruel, reactive, bitter, obsessed, always watching, always checking, always waiting for the next insult. What kind of life is that? A life where your enemies become your schedule, A life where gossip becomes your alarm clock. A life where other people's darkness decides the weather inside your chest. No, you were not made for that. You were made to grow, to learn, to repent when you are wrong, to improve when you fall, to protect what is sacred inside you, to become disciplined enough that chaos can stand in front of you and still not enter you. That is strength. Not the loud kind, not the cheap kind, not the kind that needs witnesses, the real kind. The kind that sits alone at night and chooses not to return to old habits. The kind that hears an insult and lets it die without feeding it. The kind that feels anger rising and still chooses control. That kind of strength is rare, because most people do not want control. They want permission. Permission to explode, permission to blame, permission to become ugly because someone else was ugly first. But listen carefully. Other people's behavior is not a license to lose your soul. Their disrespect does not cancel your values. Their lies do not give you permission to become false. Their cruelty does not make cruelty holy. Stay clean, even when it costs you the last word, especially when it costs you the last word. There is a strange victory in being able to say, I could answer, but I won't. I could expose, but I won't. I could destroy the story, but I won't lower myself to live inside it. That is not fear. That is discipline wearing silence like armor. And one day, you will be grateful you did not speak from the worst version of yourself. You will be grateful for the messages you deleted, the doors you did not reopen, the arguments you allowed to die, the people you stopped trying to convince. Because every time you refuse chaos, you create space. Space for focus, space for prayer, space for work, space for healing, space for the version of you that cannot grow while your hands are busy fighting ghosts. And some people are ghosts. They are not present in your life anymore, but they still haunt your decisions because you keep inviting them back through memory. Stop doing that. Let the dead chapter stay dead. Let the closed door stay closed. Let the old pain become information, not identity. You can remember without returning. You can forgive without trusting again. You can love people from a distance without giving them the knife twice. That is wisdom, not bitterness. Wisdom. Bitterness says, I will never be soft again. Wisdom says, I will be soft where it is safe and firm where it is necessary. There is a difference, a very important difference.